Most healthcare practices think that growth comes from adding more marketing, more services, more equipment, or more providers. But after working with practices all over the country, we found something surprising. The practices pulling ahead aren't necessarily the ones with the most technology. They're the ones that know how to turn technology into patient engagement, recurring revenue, measurable outcomes, and long term retention. Now, because the truth really is this: adding another service doesn't build a destination practice, adding another machine doesn't build a destination practice, adding another provider doesn't necessarily build out a destination practice, but a destination practice is built when every piece of your business works together as a system. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about tonight. Most practices don't have an equipment problem, they actually have a systems problem. Welcome, everyone. I'm Jeff Rubinoff with Dexa Plus, and joining me tonight is Dr. Tom Burlage. Tom has spent nearly 30 years helping healthcare organizations scale operations, integrate clinical services, improve accountability, and build multi site healthcare platforms. What I really appreciate about Tom's perspective is that he doesn't look at growth through the lens of equipment or marketing. He looks at growth through the lens of execution because, as Tom often says, technology is not the operating system, dashboards are not the operating system, and growth doesn't create operational excellence. It exposes whether operational excellence already exists. Welcome, Tom. Glad to have you here with us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Looking forward to it.
Yep. So, um, quick, quick intro here, and I figure we could just dive right into it. But I think really a lot of providers assume that once they add a new service line, growth is going to happen automatically. Now, you've worked with organizations for decades, you've scaled and built practices. What typically happens, like right after the equipment gets delivered within a practice? What have you seen?
Well, I think initially there's excitement, right, and then that's kind of replaced by the assumption that the arrival of that equipment is just going to automatically create growth, right? And then what'll happen is that equipment arrives. The staff may or may not receive training. A few patients are introduced to it, and um, generally speaking, that utilization gradually declines. And it, the equipment or the technology isn't the problem. That missing piece is just that workflow, right? The workflow creates accountability, ownership, and that helps facilitate that implementation. And then once the staff and once the people on site there attain that comfort level, right, and that familiarity, the utilization then tends to increase. And so if that's not present, you can almost guarantee that utilization will gradually you know, diminish at that point.
Yep.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
practices get stuck between that. They get stuck between that initial assessment and then that implementation, right? They want a new shiny thing, and there's a thought process behind that it's going to increase revenue. But if you don't have a system or a structure in place prior to the arrival of that, it's invariably going to cause failure for the most part.
Yeah, there seems to be a trap that I've seen kind of repeated over and over again. You go into a practice and they have equipment stacked up in another room, and some of the
Hmm.
equipment they spent a lot of money on, anticipating
For sure.
that there'd be some return on it, but they get the equipment with really no plan in
Yep.
place. And so
Agreed.
that was kind of the question I was going to ask you, and see what your thoughts were on that. Is where do you see practices getting stuck after they make those investments? But let's kind of drive in a little bit, further. But why do some organizations then generate tremendous value from the exact same technology, while others are barely moving the needle? I mean, there's obviously a differentiator, right? You have
Yeah, that's a
you have
great question.
specialists, you have equipment, yet there's a
Hmm.
missing element.
I think the technology behind the equipment, I think that's more or less an amplifier, right? It'll amplify the system. So uh, great systems will make technology look brilliant, right? Weak systems will make technology look ineffective, right? So I think the main thing with that is that you have to have some type of system in place and some type of methodology to help with that, because the technology is going to amplify the good or the bad. And so obviously if you have a positive system in place and an accountability framework, you're going to maximize that effectiveness.
Yeah, I like that.
You know,
Uh,
yeah. In retrospect, if you don't, and you get that, and you bring in that technology expecting it to just kind of work on its own, that not only is that not going to happen, it's going to reveal any flaws that you already have in that system pretty quickly.
that's it. And I guess people, and it many times, whether you know you're a business owner or not, people end up falling into that trap, over and over again. And when you come
Hmm.
out of that trap and you realize, hey, you know what, maybe I need to have a process behind what I'm doing. It starts really making a lot of sense. Now we use this phrase destination practice quite a bit. Right? I think if you pull back, individuals, practitioners, business owners might have a different perspective on it. Um, we have a certain perspective on what a destination practice looks like and how it functions, from an operational standpoint. And later in tonight's episode, we'll get into a little bit further some of the components, the hardware components that go into a destination practice. Why do we then term it a destination? What is it actually doing? But from an operational standpoint, what separates this destination practice from a practice that's simply offering more services? And maybe before you answer that, maybe you want to give your input on what your thought is on a destination practice. We just lost your audio.
Sorry about that.
Very well.
I think ultimately a destination practice is defined by the outcomes it delivers,
Hmm.
um, not the equipment, not the service lines. Patients, clients, they're going to come to you seeking solutions, right? They're not going to come to you seeking devices. They may come because they hear that you have red light, or they may come because they hear that you have, some new piece of tech, but they won't stay unless you have that, unless you have really, really positive and favorable outcomes. And so it's important to have that methodology down, that system in place prior to the arrival of that, right? And then you can kind of meet that patient at a point of need, given those parameters.
Yeah.
I think that's probably about the
Yeah.
best way to explain it. And I think it's a paramount importance that you have to create a favorable outcome. You have to be able to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and you have to be able to deliver on that to the patient or the client. And if you
That's
can
it.
do that, then that's what's going to really elevate that as a destination. People are going to want to come in there.
Yeah. And that's a big separating fact. You know, put all the structure in place. I've been into beautiful places, and they're not driving the people. And it's about the experience, and it is about the outcome. And you want that welcoming environment. You want people to want to keep coming back. There has to be a purpose for them to come back, and that's the outcomes, the relationship, the experience. There's so many different components to it. Now, if you were to package all that together from an operational perspective, uh, what do you think the difference would be then? What does one have and what is one missing, or is that not the issue?
No, I think it is. I think there's a series of things. I mean, I think you have to have trust, clarity. You have to produce results, right? Favorable outcomes, accountability. Yeah, yeah. Accountability is really important, and I think all of those contribute to a favorable outcome, right? You have to, regardless of who your ICP is, regardless of who that is, whoever comes in that door, you have to have a methodology in place that can assess that individual. And then you have to be able to map that journey, right? You have to be able to guide them through that. And then that's where you have to have clarity with that. You have to have an alignment of expectations. You have to develop that trust, right? And you have to be accountable. The patient or the client has to be accountable, right? That's extremely important, but also the provider. And then they'll develop that sense of trust, and they'll develop that sense of someone is actually kind of guiding them to that destination, right? Pun intended, and to that more favorable outcome.
Yeah, yeah, that's important. Now, if we get to retention, right, and this is still a long the same lines. We have the destination. People are coming. They're getting some of the outcomes. Is there anything additional that builds on retention from an operational perspective? Are there other touch points that are going to be important for the practice?
Yeah, I think ultimately objective measurement, right? You have to have objectives. You have to be able to objectively measure that patient. You have to have a starting point. You have to be able to you have to be able, as a clinician, you have to be able to demonstrate improvement or regression, right? You set up a treatment plan, you have to be able to follow that regardless of the service lines. And that just involves goal setting, communication, again, accountability. And then obviously you have to reassess, right? You have to be able to follow up with that. And that's where I think that's a potential point that I think a lot of practices a lot of these healthcare facilities aren't really capitalizing on, is that you already have a majority of these things in place. Learn how to use them, right? Especially objectively. Like you have a starting point, and then you can map that patient journey and utilize the equipment that you already have. Dex is a perfect example of that, right? Because you can demonstrate all the body biometrics, and you can have a starting point, and then you can map that journey. I know people probably get tired of hearing me say that. Clients will get tired of me hearing me say that, because I literally say that all the time. Like, you have to utilize the systems in place that you already have, create that structure, and then you can map that journey. And so I think that's extremely important. And then that's what's gonna basically really work towards creating your retention. You'll see that in your KPIs. You'll be able to document that, and you'll be able to see if it's working. And then if it's not, you take a step back and you kind of reevaluate what you're missing. And generally, if you do that, you'll be able to catch up on something, and then you can then try to reapply it.
Yeah.
Hopefully that makes sense.
No, it definitely does. Definitely makes sense. So let's talk a little bit about there's definitely a gap that we're establishing here, and then let's go a little bit more micro now into the practice. One of the things that we talk a lot about within our workshops, when we do our hands-on workshops, our in-person workshops here, is that many practices operate as silos inside the practice, and we're kind of hinting on this, right? They have great diagnostics, they might have great therapeutics, they could have great programs, they might have great recovery services, but yet they're still a bit disconnected internally, functionally. What exactly then happens if services exist independently within the practices instead of part of the journey? And I guess to clarify that is if you're allowing patients to select part of a
Hmm.
protocol, part of
Yeah,
their own journey,
absolutely.
instead of working as the provider, you're giving the patient that option, and it's just very fragmented. What have you seen that
Yeah,
functionally within
yeah. You
practices, and what exactly is happening?
you actually just nailed it. Just what you said at the end with the patient, basically, the patient or the client establishing their treatment plan or their protocol, right? That right
Yeah.
there is one of a big factor, and then they'll experience that fragmentation, right? If everyone's not aligned to, and if you don't have that accountability uh, framework in place, and you don't have people that are in charge, or a certain people that are in charge of specific aspects of that journey, you'll get that fragmentation. Utilization will then decline, and your businesses will struggle as far as to be able to obtain, continuity, right? You'll have these peaks and valleys instead of just gradual, consistent, conservative growth, right? So
Yeah.
I think it's really important to have those systems in place, but then have everybody on the same page, right? And understanding everyone's role within that system, and how important each individual really is. But then everybody working together for a collective goal. I think that's extremely
Yeah.
important.
Yep. So it really sounds like, what we're establishing here is that you can still have a practice that can have great outcomes, yet still struggle financially. That there's still some missing
100%.
elements within the functionality.
100%. And that's, I think, the difference between, you can have, it's clinical excellence, operational excellence, right? And if they're not both aligned, you're going to have, um, you know, underutilization, and you'll have poor retention ultimately, right? So you can have one without the other, but if they both aren't present, you're just not going to achieve the results that you want. You may often see, locations, practices that appear successful, outwardly. But if you look at their growth and if you look at their metrics over longer periods of time, you'll see these peaks and valleys. And so in order to have that consistent, conservative growth, you have to have an alignment of that clinical excellence as well as your operational excellence.
Yeah, I like that, and really distress clinical outcomes,
Absolutely.
patient experience, business performance, all working cohesively. Is there one element that you think is more significant than the other? Are they equal? If you're a little bit weak on business performance but strong on clinical, but patient experience is bad or indifferent, like how do you weight
Sure.
those?
Honestly, if you'd have asked me this question, I mean, I've been in the healthcare industry for 30 years now. If you'd have asked me this 20 years ago, I would have put the importance on clinical excellence. I would have, because that was more the space that I was playing in, right? Whereas
Right.
last 15, 20 years, I've just kind of gradually transitioned into more of that operator role, right? More of the builder of these systems. And I just think they're both extremely important. You can have just a stellar physician, or a chiropractor or a healthcare provider. And if you don't have a team that's aligned with that person, and then more importantly, if you don't have a structure in place, I can't emphasize how important having that structure in place is, because they can diagnose a problem, right? You can have all the greatest tools. You'll hear me say that all the time. But if you don't have a system in place to paint by the numbers and to map and again, map that journey, you're invariably, you will never get the consistency. So it's just of paramount importance. So the answer I give you now may be a little different than the answer I would have given you then, but they're both extremely important.
Yeah. I think touching on a really important subject, and really, as we're focused primarily in health optimization, longevity medicine, performance medicine, regenerative medicine. The common theme with all of this, it's cash based. You go into a cash based environment, little different than insurance, right? There's a clear divide in operational workflow, right? Where we're touching on the excellence, the experience. It's that same 5-star restaurant experience versus the not so 5-star restaurant, the other exact opposite. Then you have your fast food chains, and you can rate your fast food chains, fast in and out, certain expectation. In the cash based space, we have a combination of all of this. We have the low stars, you have the high stars, you have the fast food, you've got all of this package in one, yet it still differentiates from insurance based medicine, which you could also scale. But even some of the neglected ones where you're waiting in the lobby for an hour and a half, 2 hours, 3 hours, they're packed and they're still performing. And the doctors, it's a different world. How as you look at this, and we're looking to, and many practices transitioning into cash based, what are some of the key points and differentiators they really need to be looking out for in this case?
Yeah, insurance-based systems, patients and clients partake in that because they have to.
Right.
Cash-based systems, your patient, your client partakes in that because they want to.
Hmm.
That's your difference, right? So I think that if you're going to have a cash-based model, which I actually, you know me well enough to know that I very much prefer that, right? Because we put the power of choice back into the hands of the consumer. Um, I think where a lot of these practices and a lot of these facilities get it wrong is that they focus on pricing instead of value. Does that make
Yes,
sense?
it does.
And so your patient is going to invest on their outcomes. They're not going to invest on their procedures. So if they come in there and you find out what they want, you meet them at a point of need, and you develop that outcome, that's how you build value, right? That's how you establish that. And so I think a lot of times practices will really struggle because they focus on the pricing. I just came off of like a long-term project, and one of our on-site directors, we were trying to establish a membership based system, multiple tiers, and we went through I mean, hundreds of hours trying to analyze, looking at our ICP, looking at what they wanted, trying to fill gaps within the marketplace, understanding the cost, understanding where we had to be as far as the organization to hit their metrics as far as their minimum profitability. And I just remember the person that's literally on site as a director saying, God, there's no way that I would pay that for that service. And I, I probably should have been quiet. I was a Marine before I was a doctor. I tell people this all the time. And I'm like, then you're absolutely the wrong person to be in that role. And it was like, everyone had to take, I was meeting with with the board of directors, all the C-level, you know, and they all just went, but everybody got it. Right. And it's like, they understood. Now it's like, drop the poverty complex, right? You need to not be afraid of delivering that service, right? Because you have to understand the value of what you're bringing. That doesn't mean that you charge more than anyone else or try to take advantage of people. It's the contrary. You have to understand the value of what you bring. It's kind of I don't go on a tangent here, but it's kind of the $5 versus the $50 ribeye, right? You can give somebody the same ribeye, but if you charge them $5, they're like, what's wrong with this ribeye, right? You can charge them $150. They're like, I bet that's really a good ribeye, but there's no way I'm spending $150 on a ribeye. You can give them a $50 ribeye that this is the best ribeye I've ever had, right? There's a value that's associated with something, right? And so you just have to focus on that, on the actual value of what you're giving. And then you have to deliver, right? You just have to have the procedures in place and you have to deliver on those outcomes. So that was probably a really long-winded explanation, but the question was really resonated because just having some real world experience trying to basically weed through that. And it's not as difficult as these, entrepreneurs, these owners, these founders, as the people that own these facilities, as they're making it out to be. You have to understand the value of what you're bringing. You have to believe that. You have to be able to relay that to the patient, and they have to understand the why of that. And then you have to deliver on a really high level outcome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a really great point, and it's interesting because I see and have these conversations on a regular basis in terms of this exact topic, which is you need to be very cognizant of your skill, your ability, the reason why the patient's coming to you. If you don't see the value in what you're offering, you're not going to be able to sell that value. And we've had similar conversations in our workshops. I had an MD and a PT sitting in the room, and we're in this workshop. We're talking about shockwave therapy and the conversation of pricing. How do you price the protocol? 5-6 sessions. What are you billing out? So the PT, we were talking about higher value, $1,000, $1,250, $1,500. The PT was charging $750 and wanted to charge less. And the response to the MD was, well, I'm not an MD, so how can I charge what you charge? Right. And, it opened up a really interesting conversation because the patient was coming to the specialist wanting super high end service. And you shouldn't have an issue charging what your value is. If you undervalue what you're offering, to your point, people will think that it doesn't have that same quality. Now, you can't overcharge. I've seen the opposite end of the spectrum where people are providing a lower quality product and treatment at a much inflated price. And then that's not good either. And so it has to be high quality treatment, trained individual, producing very good outcomes or producing, good outcomes. And then you're going to have repeat patients wanting to come back. Right. I mean, I can't really stress, and you brought it up. This is probably one of the more important conversations that we have and can have, with new providers or new business owners, existing providers that have been in the industry for years, moving from insurance over to cash. It's like,
Absolutely.
and you probably hear it all the time too. I mean, to your point, the individual didn't see the value in this $600, wouldn't pay that themselves. Now, if you run the practice and you wouldn't pay that yourself, you've got a problem. you've definitely got an
Big
issue,
time.
you know?
Big time. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, I was like one of those instances. I probably, as soon as I said it, I was like, oh man, this isn't.
But
But they were like, oh yeah, it actually makes
yeah,
sense. I'm like, I was like, ooh, but it is, it's
but
true.
that's it.
It is. I mean, and it's the poverty complex or or what have you. It's just it. I
That's a
think
real thing. Yeah.
human nature, I mean, dictates that we can really be encumbered by our bias, right? So you have to be really aware of that. And you have to really be aware of that if you're implementing that system, because now what has happened is like over time, if somebody is having an insurance based model, right? There's such a massive perpetual and consistent devaluation of the care of whatever service that they're receiving because they're
Yeah.
being reimbursed at 10, 15, 20 cents on the dollar. And then when that patient has or that client has to go to a facility that's making them pay out of pocket, there's a paradigm shift that has to occur with that patient, right? It also has to occur with the provider, right? So both people have to understand that so that they can understand the value now of what they're truly delivering. And I'm glad that when you finish it, I'm glad that you kind of chimed in at the end there with the outcomes, right? Because I think the level of service and care that you give is paramount. It really is. And being able to deliver that favorable outcome, you have to have that, right? And it's not going to happen all the time. It's not going to be automatic. But if you have the system and if you have those steps and that structure in place, you're going to hit that so significantly more than you would without that structure in place. So from a consistency standpoint, you are going to far exceed the majority of those facilities and practices that don't have that in place. And that's what's going to allow you to stand out and be truly become a destination practice.
Great point. That allows us to kind of segue into what is the makeup of a destination practice. Not necessarily the equipment that's in it, but in many cases, this is also very paramount. And one of the things that we're touching on here is the ecosystem. You have to build an ecosystem, right? So when we designed our workshop and workshops, especially this next upcoming workshop, which is really going to be focused on building out a destination practice. And there's multiple elements to it. You have your full ecosystem. We're touching on operations. We're talking about the packaging, talking about the outcomes. There's a lot of thought that goes into structuring this. Now, this idea keeps surfacing that these successful practices that are building ecosystems also don't and can't rely on a single service. There's multiple components to it. Our body makeup isn't singular, right? We don't just have to eat one vitamin. We have to consume multiple vitamins, right? It's the functionality of our body, and so is the services and the treatments that go into it. Now, uh, as we're building out these ecosystems, there's a couple different directions that we can focus in on, and we'll start breaking these down. But let's talk about uh, measurement. First touch point in a practice, right? How important is that first touch point to truly understand what's happening inside the body? And you brought up DEXA as a touch point. We can also reference, call it metabolic, right? Our metabolic data outside of blood work, right? DEXA, body composition, RMR, VO2 max. How important is this objective data at that onset?
Oh, it's vital. I think that's vital. You have to have a starting point, right? I remember there's, I mean, multiple occasions, but again, to bring up this last project that I was just on, we're talking a budget of 25 million to try to set this up and try to set up a system, a company like as a startup. But we were trying to determine, we wanted that destination, location, and so like to be a part of that it was a tremendous honor, but it was a very trying experience trying to get everybody on the same page, right? And because we're talking about bias, everybody in the same room wants to have they each want their specific thing to kind of hang their hat on when they're trying to create this multidisciplinary health and wellness facility that has literally everything from concierge medicine to boutique fitness to chiropractic to physical therapy, uh, all of your different therapies. I mean, literally everything, assisted stretch. I mean, everything. and trying to get everybody on the same page. One of the things that I went back on, and I continue to kind of go back on, and they finally kind of woke up to the idea, is that we have to have a global assessment before we do everything else. We have to have a global assessment. And so that is it basically, kind of goes back to what you're saying, is building that ecosystem, right? And in order for us to have that ecosystem, we have to have in my opinion, at that point, was a global assessment. And so once we had kind of a starting point, then we were able to kind of reverse engineer like everything that we wanted. And then we could basically align that with everything that we had for our assessment. DEXA was a big part of that. We did a markerless motion capture for range of motion. We did our lab work. We did our VO2 max, RMR. I mean, we tried to compile literally everything that we could as part of that initial assessment. So regardless of what the patient or the client, and we had an aesthetics line in this too, right? So regardless of what the client, I mean, we have supplements. I mean, we had just everything you could think of under the sun with this. And so in order for us to essentially figure out how to create that, we had to have a starting point. And the starting point was that assessment. And so that's how you can then create an ecosystem. So everything kind of flows from that beginning point.
Yeah, that's key. And to point out, you definitely entry point into health optimization isn't that kind of budget, right? You guys
Yeah,
over there, you're
right.
setting something up completely big facility, lots of square foot,
Very. Yeah,
right?
I think
So
the Franklin facility that we had was 13,000 square feet. The massive facility. So having to try to basically understand, I mean, and again, and you have a lot of people in the room. You have, 6, 8, 10 really smart
a lot of money.
individuals that are throwing money into this, right? They all want things a certain way, and then you have to basically kind of just just gently lead them back back to like, how do we actually make this all work? Well, that ecosystem is going to be dependent upon creating an assessment. And so not to be long-winded with it, but I think that's really important, but it's also super helpful. So a lot of these practices will already have a majority of this stuff in place, right? So it's like, find out where there are gaps, find out if there's any gaps in what you currently have, what you currently offer, and then if there is,
Yeah,
how do
that's
you
big.
fill that? Well, go back to the beginning and let's figure out if you're assessing that individual appropriately. Are there some things in that assessment that you're not taking care of? If that's the case, then how do you take care of that? And then you can decide, hey, I need to buy a bunch of this stuff, right? But chances are, if you have a majority of that already, then start there. Start with that, and then work forward from there. And then that's how you can generate your outcomes, right? And that's how you can, the longer that you can retain that patient or that client, that's how you build that lifetime patient. That's how you build that value. That's how you build that potential referral source, right? Is you have to establish that relationship. So it's not just transactional, right? So you're basically, you're creating a partnership. You're creating that relationship together.
Right. So what I'm hearing, multiple touch points with a patient, great patient outcome. There has to be a purpose and reason why this person comes back, and it's not just once a year. Right? It's not even just once every 6 months.
100%,
Right? We
100%.
want to see them
Reassessment is
kind of,
vital. Yeah,
yeah,
100%. And your reassessments will really help with that as well. And every time you reassess that patient or that client, you can utilize a lot of the same things that you used for that initial assessment, right? You don't have to do a DEXA, every day, but you do a DEXA when they first come in. You utilize like a perfect example of that is the scale that you offer, like through DEXA, right? They can kind of see, and it's not going to give you the accuracy of the DEXA, but what it's going to do is going to allow you to see trends. Where is that client trending? Where's that patient trending? And so then you reassess periodically. Even if you're doing it, quarterly, if you're doing it twice a year, you're still drawing that patient or that client back in to see where they are. Everybody wants to know where they are. And then that sets up your system. And then when they do come in and they do really well in that point, that's when you you basically review that with them, right? You remind them of why they initially came in. You remind them of where they were at that point, and then where they are now. And so that's what creates that relationship.
yep. Yeah, real solid point. And the essence then, as these programs develop for a destination, there's multiple components to it, but we can put it into a nice triangle. You have your data, your metabolic data, blood work. There's the assessment stage has to be measurable, has to be precise, it has to be repeatable. You have your program. Your program is built and scaled off of the information that you get from your initial data. So you build out your program, nutrition, exercise, HRT, peptides, whatever that journey might look like for that individual patient. Then there's support mechanism that helps keep that program going, which would be recovery therapeutic, right? Now, from that side of it, um, the recovery keeps the program going, keeps enabling the person. The program feeds the data, which you had mentioned, right? The repeatability of it. We want to test every quarter, and it's just a kind of this pendulum motion that goes back and forth through these categories. Now, on the
Absolutely.
recovery side, what's been your experience? That here's the patient, they understand uh, your background from a therapeutic recovery perspective. How does this fit into that overall equation?
I think it's just kind of an expansion of that. Like, the recovery just creates those consistent touch points, right? It allows you to establish that long-term relationship with that patient or with that client. And it's just something that I think a lot of places don't necessarily capture. And if you can figure out a way to put that into that system,
Yeah.
that allows you to stay in touch with them. It's just another. I would always equate it. I mean, I have a diplomate in sports medicine, so I would see a ton of high level patients, high level clients when I was full time practice. And one of the things that I kind of realized over a period of time was how much time and how much effort high level athletes, professional athletes, Olympic athletes, how much time they put into recovery. It's astonishing. It's as much or more than they put into training. And so I would kind of treat, and one of the reasons I got a diplomate in sports medicine is because I just thought everybody should have the ability to be treated like a high level athlete. And your Olympic athletes, your professional athletes, they would have the latest and greatest tech, and they would have it years before your general population would have it, right? And so I thought it was unfair. Like I was like, man, I think we should all be able to have that. And so I really wanted to get into that. And so I just remember, really making a conscious effort to incorporate recovery into that. And I would tell like patients that, like, you have to focus on recovery. And what I would tell them, like, the exercises that you do in between your visits here, that's part of your recovery. Um, Working on your mobility, trying to eat trying to, your nutrition, mobility, all of these things, all of the, not necessarily, passive, but our active therapies, that's all part of your recovery. Passive therapy is also a recovery, clearly, right? And so I would really emphasize that. So I love that you bring that up, because I think that's a rarity that I think a lot of practices miss out on. And that's a whole other potential for revenue, but a potential for for that client to stay in touch with you. If you help them through that, they'll be in touch, right? They'll stay focused on you. And certain patients, certain clients, they get that, they understand that, they get the why of that. And so if you can deliver that line of service, that's going to give your practice the ability to just transform it, because you're going to give them something that they didn't really, a lot of times they don't even realize that they needed it, but then once they understand it, they're going to be dead on with that.
Once they understand it. That's such an important
Correct.
point, which is why we do the webinars. Another
Correct.
reason why we do the workshops. People are like, hey, it's got to go to a workshop, you got to learn, got to understand, get it. You have to network, but understanding the dynamic of how modalities work together to create the ecosystem, how the business works to create the ecosystem, how the marketing works to create the ecosystem, how the operations glues it all together. These are elements that in the insurance base, they don't need it. There's so many missing parts of it. They're very procedurally focused, meaning someone comes in with an issue, you put the band-aid on it, send them out the door. This environment for the ecosystem, it's about the journey, and it's a long-term journey, right? I dealt with tennis elbow today. tomorrow I'm gonna have a knee issue. I want to be the best, and that's what I love what you said about, from an athletic perspective, whether you're, a weekend warrior, a professional athlete, just getting back into shape, or just going about your daily life. If you can't do what you love, if you can't, a lot of people are into pickleball today, tennis, right? If you want to play with the grandkids or play with your kids, or just walk strongly and briskly, outside, there's people in their 50s and 60s that can't do that, and they're struggling with inflammation and all sorts of other, chronic related issues that can be resolved. And this, to your point of, many of these practices out there are missing that component. And I don't, you know, I, for us, it's one of the elements it has to be. It's not even an optional, hey, either I want it or I don't want it. Can I afford not to have it? And that's what, each practice has to think about, from the data collection. The data is important. If you only have one data point, you're missing the other data points. Maybe the patient goes someplace else. If you don't have the recovery, maybe the patient goes someplace else. Why would we even put ourselves in that position as a practice owner to say, hey, that's okay. I have hamburgers, but I don't sell fries. Well, guess what? The guy down the street sells both, and that's where the patient's going. We have to think about it from that perspective, just in a more healthy environment. Uh,
Yeah, I agree. That's a great
yeah,
point.
cash-based medicine, and this is really what it's all about, is building this practice, understanding all of the flow. Now, one thing that we, hear constantly, again, this idea of insurance, replacing insurance revenue. We talked about it right in the beginning. Afraid to even raise prices. This is another one, right? Medical providers went to school to become medical providers, not to become business operators, right? And so this is important. And I think we've referenced a lot about what the practices can get wrong about transitioning to cash-based models. Is there any other element that you would plug in here?
Yeah, I think I think memberships are extremely important. I don't know if we touched on that or not, but I mean, I think a membership model is extremely important. And then I think where the secret sauce with that and the peek behind the curtain, so to speak, stems with, if you understand what services you can deliver, and those services may be different based upon location, and maybe different based upon what service lines that that practice is offering. But I think you have to take the time and effort to understand from a profitability standpoint where you need to be. Like, what do I need to charge? Like, if I have a given number of clients, I mean, I'm going to reveal a little bit of the secret sauce. You have to be able to understand, how many clients or patients do you think you're willing to see, or do you have the ability to see? One, how many do you think you're actually going to see? Two, and worst case scenario, how many would you see? Do those three things like through a pro forma, work that up. If you don't know how to do that, then hire somebody that call, hire, go through us, and we can show you how to do that. But you have to understand where your profitability lies. Once you understand that, then you can determine what you have to charge for each of those levels of membership, right? And then I would stick at three. I generally don't like. I mean, I've had people say we should have five, we should have four, we should have two. It's you can do that if you want, but there's a reason these billion-dollar companies like Apple and there's a reason that they have like three levels of like MacBook Pros. There's a reason they have like, because they have the high, the middle, and the low, right? They want you to buy the middle one, right? And they're okay if they only have 5 or 10% of the population that buys the high end one, because that's so much more profitable for them. There's very little of an increase in the expense for them to make that product, right? So I think membership models are extremely important, and I think you have to understand where that is, where you have to price that, and then you have to determine if there's anything that you're going to utilize as like a loss leader, if that makes sense, right? You may have to. You're not necessarily giving something away, but it's more of an opportunity cost. You're sacrificing that for something better, and so you have to understand that. And it's not the same for everybody, right? You have to do like a period of discovery to understand what exactly you need. But if you do that, your chance of success increases exponentially. And then you'll find that the only thing that you're going to think about is why you didn't get out of the insurance game sooner. Because people are going to come to you because they want to come to you, not because they're required to.
They're going to pay. They're going to pay the dollar amount. And depending on where you
100%.
are,
They're going to be glad
they'll
to
pay
pay.
more.
They're going to be glad to pay. And they're going to, because they understand the value, right? They're not walking out of the grocery store with a cart full of groceries for free, right? They're picking exactly what they want because they pay for it, and they're appreciative of what it is that they've acquired, right? So you're creating that value in that long-term customer. And then the obviously what's most important is that positive and that favorable outcome.
That's really, keying in on something important from an operational perspective, how it's presented to the patient, how you attract that client long term, how you tie them into your ecosystem long term. If you don't have a membership, there's an opportunity for them to leave. If you're doing one offs, every day I have same conversation. I had another one today. They're just getting ready to start out, discussing their membership. They're talking about their billables for the flow. One of the things that we have to stress, and you touched on it, as we look at these membership programs, you're also putting in a specific protocol that your clients follow. If you have one client that does a DEXA scan, one client that doesn't do a DEXA scan, if you offer a package, let's say, of shockwave therapy, and you do it a la carte, one at a time, but that the healing cascade session is 5 or 6 sessions long, and you're going to build them independently, per time, there's a high probability chance they don't come back. They might feel amazing and not come back, or maybe, they don't understand, the clinical significance of multiple touch points for a treatment. There's all these variables. Packages are important. Bundling is important.
Absolutely.
Membership, building recurring revenue is important. Stacking modalities is important. And
Something you can
not
do.
reinventing the wheel. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but you just brought up a really good point. Something that you can do, like say for Shockwave, or something that has like 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 packages, right? Like sessions, and you want to be able to offer that, but you don't necessarily know how to put that into a membership model. That's super common, right? So
It
not to
is.
be, don't be alarmed or afraid or hesitant to put that in. What you can do is you can offer a percentage, you can offer a discount. Like you can offer a package discount. Like let's say that you're for whatever level membership you are, that might equate to a 10, 20, 50%, whatever it is that again, you have to determine what's going to still be valuable still valuable or profitable to the organization, right? But you can do a discount based upon a percentage, off taken off of that package based upon your membership, right? And so that's something that I've seen work really, really well. And it's just a matter of making sure that you still have that minimum profitability, right? You'll hear me say that a lot. What is our minimum profitability? What is our expected profitability? Because in the end, we still have a business, right? We still have to keep the lights on, right? And so having that understanding. But no, you brought up a really good point. So I just wanted to hop on that. It's like, be aware of, charge your appropriate rate, charge fair market value, but then also if you can be willing to take a percentage off based upon a membership participation, that's a great way to keep them involved.
I like that. And now a final to this part of the conversation. How important is patient accountability overall? And if you're thinking about building recurring revenue models, but this patient accountability, and maybe it's both ways. Maybe it's provider accountability to the patient accountability to themselves, and how do you look at that part?
I, Honestly, I think it's probably one of the strongest drivers of engagement, retention, and most importantly, outcome. And you need, I think, the practices that are very transparent and clear. They really have clarity and purpose with that, and they just really try to initiate the importance of accountability both for the patient but also for the provider. Those are the ones that are going to be most successful. So I don't think you can emphasize enough the importance of patient accountability. And you can do that when you're doing your reassessments too. Like there's all kinds of little, I don't want to call them tricks because that's not accurate, but there's all kinds of little nuances that you can incorporate with your operating system, right? With when we have this operating system put into place and you create that structure, there's all kinds of little things, but that, being able to occasionally, bring that up as far as like reinforce that accountability is extremely important for a favorable outcome and long-term participation.
Retesting, right?
Hmm.
Retesting is an accountability metric.
Yep,
The
it is.
program's working, the client's following through. And so there's all these touch points. I like that. Having the client come back in as often is possible, figuring out what that looks like for your facility. You might have 1,500 square feet. Maybe you can't have people coming in all the time going into a hyperbaric chamber. Maybe it's not practical for that facility, but is it practical to find a solution to have a quarterly touch point with a client? Is it practical to have a monthly touch point with a client, especially if they're just starting out their journey?
That great point on the hyperbaric chamber too, because of the time component of that, right? Are you taking up staff? Are you taking up space? Or, given the square footage of your facility, are you actually decreasing your profitability because of that? But that's a great point that you bring up.
Yeah. So, and I like these modalities for the destination practice where patient can come in, set them up, and walk away. Right. Red light, PMF,
Red
hyperbaric,
light, big
right?
time. Yep.
Multiple touch
Red light.
points where they can come in and, hey, you know what? You're there 20 minutes and then you can leave afterwards.
We utilize one of the facilities. We utilize red light with one of our membership models, and it was included with one of the tiers, and we really struggle with that. But in the end, it was like when you took. I remember I did an exercise where I took the top 50 patient complaints,
Yeah.
musculoskeletal, mental, traumatic brain, PTSD, everything. Top 50. And of all the service lines that we had at the time, red light covered over 90% of those 50. And so, yeah, not just like, I'm talking like high end, like the tables that you deliver, the high end red light tables. It was over 90% of that. And so we decided that to benefit the patient, to really create a favorable outcome, we actually included red light into that membership. So they didn't have to pay for it. Whereas if they didn't have that membership, they would pay, they could still have packages, they could still do a la carte. But we just found that our outcomes were so much more impressive. And we went back and we would research the patients, and it just came to be that a lot of them are taking advantage of that red light. So it's like whatever you can do to get them into that, still maintain your profitability and still gravitate towards a favorable outcome, you're going to have just a rock in practice, regardless of what it is that you're selling.
I like it. And they're basically selling, right? Let's go back to the beginning. They're selling the outcome, right? They're selling the journey. The modalities are the vehicles on how we get them through their journey to their outcome. If we're missing the components within the practice, or if you have ineffective modalities within the practice, you're not going to get them there. If you're not an aesthetic based practice and you're bringing someone through a journey, but your modalities are all focused on aesthetics, you're going to be in trouble, right? You
Yeah.
have to have the
And,
right
and
mix
again,
of components.
yep. And again, your technology is an amplifier. So if you have really good structure, if you have your systems in place, if you put the time into your infrastructure, it's going to look like wizardry, right? Your technology is going to be brilliant, but if you
Right.
don't, it'll reveal gaps very, very quickly. And that's the thing. You have to have that structure in place, and then once you do, everything else just kind of falls into place.
Talk about those gaps a little bit. What kind of operational gaps are revealing when you have that kind of
I think I think when you have an operating system, I mean, it's it. A lot of people think if they get a certain type of equipment, or if they look at a certain type of technology, or if they have a certain EHR, or if they have a dashboard, or something like that, they assume that that's just going to automatically do the work, right? And from an operational standpoint, these things are all just tools. Your operational system, it's going to consist of your workflows, your SOPs, your training, accountability, leadership, KPIs, communication, things that create that accountability framework. And so it's extremely important to have that in place. And that's like the essence of that. Like, I think you and I have had this discussion a couple times. Tony and I have had this discussion. Kristen, we've all had this discussion about how you can have all these incredible things on site, whether you're a practice or whether you're a business, but that helps diagnose a problem, or that's really good at revealing gaps, right, within that business or within that facility. But you need the operating system, you need that structure to go from diagnosing a problem to providing a solution. And that's what an operating system will do. That's what your structure does. And I don't want it to sound like overwhelmingly complex, because it's not, but it's such a neglected part of having a successful practice and a business in general. You have to have that structure in place. And that's basically how I gravitated from being a full-time practitioner to a consultant. And basically that's what I do. I'm an operations consultant because it's just so incredibly important. And you'll see practices and you'll see businesses and you'll see these entities just transform, basically because they have already had a majority of what they need. It's already there. They just have to figure out how to implement it. It's the difference between ideation and creation and implementation is you have to have that path. And that's what from an operations standpoint, that's what that structure will provide.
That's it. I like it. And these are some of the ideas that we dive even deeper into in our workshops, right? The webinars, we get some really some good clarity on concepts, and we can dig further. In an hour on a webinar can only give us so much. Doing them in person and bringing in multiple faculty members that have had decades of experience within this industry, the amount of information that you can consume and
Agreed.
really learn is super impactful. Now, one of the reasons why we developed our workshop, actually put together our training center in the Fort Lauderdale area, was to help bring all of this to small groups, right? To our providers. I've gone to a lot of workshops around the country over the years, as I'm sure you have. There's always missing elements. And in the cash-based space, there's a lot of hype, a lot of excitement, right? They talk a lot about different ideas, right? You can dive into the peptides, nutrition. Nobody's connecting the dots, right? There's so many missing strands and paths to connect all of these different programs. When we bring people together in our small groups, we have 20, 21 people in a small setting, high quality faculty, and we break down each of these components. We go through why is metabolic important. We go through the different modalities. We go through the modalities of recovery. We talk about how you implement from a clinical perspective and the secret sauce, the business perspective. That's always left out. No one wants to address both, right? It's either you go to a conference and they only talk about the business side, and you're like, well, what about the clinical? How does this get applied? Why does it get applied? How do the modalities work together, right? How does the metabolic impact your program? How does recovery impact your program? How does therapeutic impact? Why do you not want to run away from therapeutic? Right? And
Hmm.
then diving into the marketing and the business and making sure that you have high quality people. And that's one of the things that we've really we strive
Sure.
to do at all of our workshops is really important.
That's something we talked about too. Like as a clinician, I think I have a unique perspective on that because there's nothing worse than going to a seminar, picking something up, getting a piece of equipment, getting a piece of tech, taking it back, and you're like, okay, how the hell do I use this now? Right? Because you don't have the back end support, right? You don't have the understanding on how to apply that and how to implement it. And so one thing that, I've always tried to fulfill that gap is to give people the tools and the understanding so that they can be comfortable, so that they have that understanding. And if they're comfortable with whatever that tech is or that equipment or that pathway or what they're using as specifics from a service standpoint, they'll be able to utilize it. And not only it's see one, do one, teach one, right? Not only will they be comfortable, they'll be able to apply that, and then they'll be able to tell others, and and then it just kind of grows exponentially. And so that's definitely a much needed, I think, service in our space. It just hasn't been utilized, right? And so people, I know what it's like to be a clinician. I know what it's like to be in practice. I know what it's like to see 200-300 patients a week, right? I don't have time to deal with that, right? It's like I need it to work. I just need it to work. Like when you give me something, I have to understand how this works, right? I totally understand it in that respect. And so one thing that we would try to do is we try to create these systems that we can, you have to do a discovery portion. Once you discover it, then you understand the scope. And then once you create that structure, then you apply it. And then you essentially, like you're doing with a patient, then we have to kind of reevaluate after, whether it's 30, 60, 90 days, we have to see where that practice is, right? And then you'll see the trends. And then as you trend upward, then eventually you take the training wheels off and you're like, okay, now it's time for you to leave the nest, right? So it's extremely effective, but what ends up happening is if you don't utilize that, you're just scratching the surface on accountability, but then overall success and health of these practices and these facilities.
Yeah, like that. The overall health, the health of a practice, health and success, right? Tying in
Absolutely.
the different components. Now we kind of touch on this, and I think this is a really good point, question. Also, get your thoughts on this. I think you just alluded to it, but I'll kind of clarify it. You go to the conference, get inspired, you walk out, no roadmap.
Yeah, you're going to
What do you
default to
do?
what's comfortable. You're going to
Yeah,
default to whatever's comfortable, right? It's like it's an opposite of default aggressive. You're gonna default to comfort. And so if it's not, if you can't implement it almost immediately, and if you can't develop that muscle memory quickly,
get used
you're
to.
going to default to whatever's comfortable, and you'll go back to your old habits. It's going to happen probably 90% of the time, unless you incorporate some type of methodology and structure to change that habit and build that muscle memory. You have to, and then you have to get reps. It's like anything else. You have to develop that habit.
Yep. Now you're going to be one of our faculty members at our upcoming workshop. You're going to get into
I
operations,
am.
workflow, and all of these
I
great
am. I'm looking forward to boring the hell out of everybody.
that one. If you were to put one key takeaway, right? Providers come, business owners come to the workshop. What would you hope that they walk away with thinking differently about?
I want to give them something that they can take back with them so that they can actually apply it and they can see a real world difference in real time. And then it doesn't have to be an epiphany, but I just want them to be able to understand how you can literally transform your practice very quickly. Even the ones that are successful, there's still room for growth, right? I think that if we can equip them with the tools that they can pick these things up quickly and they can develop that, I think they're going to be pretty astonished by how much they can transform a practice and they can have that destination. And just teaching them those simple little tools, I think, is going to be super important.
Yeah, that's a really really solid point. And here's how we kind of wrap it up for tonight. But if a provider watching tonight feels that they're working harder than ever, adding services, seeing lots of patients, staying busy, but growth still isn't what you want it to be. And to your point, you could be just starting out, you could already be successful. There's room to grow, room to fine tune. What's the first question they ask themselves? Well, they can go to anatomylab.com. It's ANATOME lab.com. Get registered for the webinar. We have a couple upcoming webinar or workshops. Sorry, we have a couple upcoming workshops. We have our business builder workshop, building a destination practice, June 26th and 27th. It's going to be super impactful. Then we have a shockwave therapy workshop coming up at the end of July. And all of our workshops are a lot of fun. Everybody has a great time, a lot of amazing networking. Networking with the faculty is outstanding. We have a lot of just a I would say a smorgasbord of topics that we're going to cover, and we will dig into the different modalities. We have a doctor local who's on the sports medicine regenerative side. We're going to talk about adjunct therapy, working with implementing shockwave and PRP or orthobiologic into health optimization longevity practices. We're going to talk about the different pillars: metabolic, recovery, therapeutic, how they all blend together for the journey. And then on day two, this is Tom's day, big day. We actually have it broken up quite a bit. We're going to get into the business functionality, operation, workflow. We're going to talk about ozone. We're going to talk about peptides. We are also going to have some speakers come in on the marketing. We're going to have panel talks, individual talks. It's going to be a real good time. A lot of actionable information. Tom, it was really great having you on tonight. Glad we're able to put
You as
this
well.
webinar together.
I always enjoy it, Jeff. Thank you. Yeah, our conversations are never brief.
That's it. Yeah.
Can we flood the room with ozone on that second day, by the way? Can we just amp it
Yeah.
up?
We'll flood it with
Yeah.
ozone. Yeah. We'll make sure everybody's
Awesome. I'm
happy.
on board.
That's great. All right. Everyone that's with us
Appreciate
tonight
you.
and watching on the rewatch, thank you guys for being here. Tom, hang in there for a minute. And
Yeah. Also, I
we'll
was going
see
to
you guys
mention,
next week. Yeah, go ahead.
if anyone has any questions, if they want to shoot them through to you, you can forward them to me. I'm happy to answer them. I'll make sure that if anyone sends a question out, I'll answer it personally. Make sure that we can address any questions that they might have, since they've been good enough to sit here and listen to us. I'm happy to help.
That's outstanding. Awesome. All right. Great. Thank you.
All right, buddy.
See you guys at the workshop. That's where we'll see you.